It's up to you. Miami-Dade is at 10% positivity.
Oof. We're gonna get this meeting started. Thank you all. There we go. Okay. I'm standing in for our Commissioner Ariola as chair today, so forgive me as I get my bearings, but I'm gonna call this meeting to order, and I believe we're missing just Commissioner Alford right now. So with that, I would ask that we have a motion to adopt the agenda, unless there are any comments. Motion in a second. Any comments on the agenda? Any comments from the community? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Great. We also have 2 sets of minutes. Hopefully you were able to review those. If there are any changes, please let us know. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. Motion in a second. Any comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, we have minutes. First up on our actual agenda is discussion of pending referrals, and it is 211119 Alachua County Greenhouse Gas Inventory. I believe we're turning this over to our team for a presentation. Oh, it's on Zoom. Who's giving it?
I am Matthew Katz from ICLEI.
Excellent. Hello, sir. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me. If it's all right, can I share my screen, or would you like to flip through the slides, whoever's controlling this?
Why don't
if someone is talking and answering my question, I cannot hear you.
I think that we'll let you, if it makes sense for you to control it, if you want to stop sharing, and then go ahead and we'll let you share your screen.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, and I will begin. Well, again, thank you for everyone for having me. My name is Matthew Katz, and I'm from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. I'm presenting to you all today the results of our Alachua County 2019 Community-Wide and Government Operations Greenhouse Gas Inventories. We're going to be discussing the results and some next steps. So a little bit about ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. If you do not know who we are or what we do, we work with more than 2,500 of local and regional governments across the world committed to sustainable urban development. We're active in now over 125 countries, and we support local governments through sustainable policy related to low emissions, nature-based, equitable, resilient, and circular development. So we support our members through all of these pathways. Today, I'll be discussing our support for Alachua County through our low emissions pathway, often referred to as decarbonization. Just wanted to show you the map of our support within the United States. These are all of our members. We're active in over 325 local governments in over 45 states at this point. And we do have a pretty large presence in Florida, so I do want to just show you our reach across the country. This is ICLEI's framework. Really, it describes our integrated climate action plan process, from committing to action, analysis, to accelerating, upscaling, and advocating for change. For our low emissions pathway, which we are currently supporting through, or which we currently supported through their fee for service, we did this through the inventory, which would be the commit and mobilize, and also analyze and set a baseline, as well as we are suggesting to follow through the process of climate action planning. So going from there, you'd be climate action planning, and then going to monitoring impacts and reporting, things like that. So ICLEI supports our members throughout the whole process. Just another example of how we support our members. We support our members in a variety of ways. not just fee for service, as we did with Alachua County, but through member benefits. We support them through one-on-one technical assistance, through cohorts, which are more scheduled programs, as well as city-to-city dialogue and things like that. So we do help cities in a variety of ways. So getting into the actual results, these are the results of the community-wide inventory. For those who do not know, the community inventory was built upon the GPC basic protocol, which is the global protocol for cities. This does include a few extra sectors like the industrial process emissions. Other sectors like forestry are also included, but these are included as information only. So these emissions and these removals from nature are not depicted here. So I do want to just go over this in a little bit more detail. For those who don't know, in the community-wide inventory, you do have main sectors such as sectors from the energy sector, residential, commercial, and industrial energy. These usually represent electricity consumption from the community, as well as fuel consumption from the community, such as fuel from furnaces, if there are any, heating application, things like that. Then you have the transportation sector, which represents on-road transportation. It represents public transportation, aviation, off-road, etc. You have the solid waste sector, which represents wasting in landfills and other activities related to solid waste. You then have water and wastewater, which represents water treatment and related activities. And then you have process and fugitive emissions, which also represents emissions related to the energy sector, but most often it relates to fugitive emissions coming from natural gas distribution pipelines, as well as process emissions from industrial plants, such as cement production. So a few notable emission sources here. Do want to point out that the largest sector is transportation, which we're going to show you a pie chart after this, followed by commercial and residential. I'm sorry, I left out process. So transportation followed by process, then commercial and residential. A few other things to note. Electricity usage was the largest source of emissions with 34%, followed by mobile combustion, which is on-road transportation. This was also roughly 34% of emissions. Stationary combustion, which is heating applications, only represented 4% of total emissions. So those are some things that are often what you would address in when you are climate action planning. A few other things to note here. The cement production from Argos Cement LLC roughly represented 21% of all emissions. So this was the third largest source of emissions. So yeah, this is what the community emissions were made of. Total emissions were roughly 4.2 metric tons of CO2e. On this slide, you can see the emissions by sector. Again, this is a fairly normal breakdown of community-wide emissions, with just over a third of emissions from transportation and mobile sources. The industrial or the process and fugitive emissions, again, is the second largest source of emissions, followed by commercial and then residential energy. So for government operations inventory, this inventory was built based on ICLEI's local government operations protocol. This protocol is widely used across the United States for governments who are building an inventory for their local government operations. All activities that were 100% owned and operated by the government were collected. There are some activities that are not owned and operated by the government, such as employee commute and estimated waste and wastewater generation that were also included in the inventory. However, those latter sectors are not all that significant. Just to break it down for you, the inventory represents buildings and facilities, so the energy usage within those facilities, the emissions from vehicle fleets, so whether it's on-road and off-road vehicle fleets, employee commute, so this is the the transportation to and from work from the employees, solid waste generation, wastewater and water generation, and the treatment related to that wastewater. And then process and fugitive emissions. So this would, again, be the fugitive emissions from natural gas distribution. Just to break this down a little bit further, buildings and streetlight electricity consumption was the largest source of emissions with around 42% of total emissions. And vehicle fleet was the second largest source of emissions with around 25% of total emissions. Employee commute was third with 20%, and then building fuel consumption was fourth with 11%. All in all, total government operations emissions was just under 20,000 metric tons. And again, just breaking it down by sector, just so you can visualize it a little bit better. Similar to the community-wide, this is a pretty normal looking government operations inventory. Buildings and facilities was the largest sector, again, followed by fleet and commute. This is, again, pretty normal for a government that does not own a significant wastewater and water and solid waste sites and infrastructure. Before I continue, are there any questions, or should I take questions at the end if there's time?
Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question about you mentioned that Argos was 21% of emissions countywide.
That is, let me just go back to that.
20.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, can you give me more detail on that? Like, is that primarily the Newberry plant? Can you split that between the South Main plant and the Newberry plant, or is it just aggregate? And can you be more specific about what that means?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I would have to look further into the inventory records to get you the location. The way we go about this is collecting emissions data, direct emissions data directly from the EPA flight database. So it's a database that large industrial emitters directly report to. So anything within the Alachua County boundary, we collected and entered into the inventory. These emissions are from the actual process of producing cement. So it's not stationary combustion, nothing relating to like heating a building or whatnot. It's directly related to producing that cement.
Wow. So part of that is due to the fact that part of the reason that they have such a huge share is that we don't do a lot of industrial production. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but still, that's pretty enormous.
That's huge.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I would say, it is making a large portion of the emissions. One, because cement production is a substantial source of emissions in general. And two, just compared to total emissions, it is rather large. It is a rather large subset of emissions, for sure.
We have one more question. Commissioner Alford?
Yeah, I apologize for being late. On the solid waste generation, does that include construction and demolition?
So I would also have to look further into the data, but I believe so. The way we go about collecting this data is we received waste generation, the annual waste generation from the solid waste department of Alachua. And we plug that directly into our inventory calculation tool. With that, we have a waste characterization that calculates emissions from there. That waste characterization only includes organic waste that would sit in a landfill and emit methane. So in terms of construction and demolition waste, it would include any organic material like wood that would sit there and decompose into methane.
So I guess if there was, huge amounts of concrete that would only show up in the fuel used to transport the waste?
Yes, yeah, we have a VMT model for that would consider, any large heavy duty truck that is moving around and about the city and county.
And similarly, how is new construction accounted for?
In what way? Do you mind
Well,
elaborating a little bit?
Well, if you have a building that, for instance, is torn down, there's a lost amount of waste that goes into that, right? So if it's a concrete building, there was concrete already made, blah, 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 assuming that was counted in the past, but then you come back and you replace that building. What are the inputs that would be counted in the creation of a new building should you replace the building?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, any material that is landfilled and is organic would be accounted for in the waste generation calculations. Any material that was driven into the county to be constructed as part of a building, if they were developed inside the county, then those emissions would be considered. If they were developed outside the county, those are called Scope 3 emissions, often called consumption-based emissions, which is not part of the scope of this inventory. If the and we, ICLEI certainly helps communities take on consumption-based inventories. However, again, the scope of those inventories are extremely different, yeah, often done separately from this inventory. And just to be clear, this inventory is often referred to as a sector-based inventory, as opposed to, again, a consumption-based inventory.
And that's fine. I just wanted to understand exactly what was captured and not captured. Thank you very much.
No problem.
I think that's all our questions for now, if you want to continue.
Wonderful. So I do want to just compare some of the metrics from the city of Gainesville because it is so substantial in the county, again, to the county. So right here, you are seeing the consumption of electricity and the consumption of natural gas by sector, comparing from Gainesville to Alachua County. I do want you all to keep in mind that all of the Gainesville activity and emissions are accounted for within Alachua County's inventory. So the green bars would also be a subset of the orange. The inventories also utilize the same accounting methodologies as much as possible for obvious reasons, so we can have an apples-to-apples comparison. But due to limited data from county electricity providers, some of the data for the electricity portion was estimated. So you'll see here for residential electricity, Alachua County consumption was around 2.2 times higher. For commercial, it was around 1.5 times higher. And for industrial, it was only 1.1 times higher. So this really tells us that, for example, for industrial, that Gainesville does make up a substantial portion, almost all of the county's industrial electricity consumption. And also it does make up substantial portions of the commercial as well. For natural gas, residential makes up the county consumption is around 1.9 times higher. For commercial, it's around 1.4 times higher. In industrial, it is exactly 1 times higher. All natural gas consumed for industrial was the same amount for the county. And these are all this data was for natural gas provided by GRU because they are the only centralized natural gas provider in the county. And for all those who don't know, electricity is measured in kilowatt hours. The units are scaled down by hundreds of millions, just for the ease of comparison, as well as natural gas is measured in therms, and it is also scaled down by millions.
All right, we have one question, Commissioner Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what this tells us is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that nearly all, if not all, industrial production in the county is happening in the city of Gainesville. Because, or is this just city of Gainesville and Alachua County operations? It's not, no, because
No, it's not,
commercial and
actually.
industrial, yeah. So either there's industrial operations that are not using electricity or natural gas outside the city limits of Gainesville, or,
Or it's not a million.
right, the overwhelming majority then is happening inside the city of Gainesville. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. I would say the overwhelming majority of electricity consumption is happening inside the city of Gainesville. And obviously the all the industrial natural gas is happening inside the city of Gainesville. I will say there for natural gas, we did have a apples to apples comparison because the data for the county and the city was provided by GRU. For electricity, the data was provided by for Gainesville. Obviously, the data was provided by GRU, but the electricity for the county, we had GRU providing it, and we had other utility providers providing it. So, there are some outside factors here, but I would say this relationship right here is pretty accurate in terms of what industrial activity is happening within the boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, you can continue if you have other, it's like you have one or two more slides.
Oh. Yep. And here's another comparison for you all. On the left, we are comparing the VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, in the billions. And you can see that Alachua County activity is roughly 2.4 times higher. I would most likely attribute this to more distributed communities. People are driving more to get to places compared to Gainesville. Again, the county is also much larger than just the city, so there is a lot more driving going on. And this considers all passenger and freight travel. For solid waste tonnage on the right side, this is comparing that in thousands. You can see that the county is roughly 1.3 times higher. So Gainesville does make a considerable amount of solid waste tonnage here. So yeah.
We have another question, Mayor Poe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For a person traveling in a vehicle from outside the county into the county, do only the miles once they hit the county line count, or is it wherever their point of origin was?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate that. So all inventory protocols, especially the one that we're using, the GPC, call for 50% of cross-boundary VMT to be counted. So based on planning purposes and based on the city and the county's ability to curb cross-boundary emissions and activity, again, all of the protocols call for 50% of those cross-boundary emissions to be accounted for. So what we do is account for 100% of in-boundary transportation, and then 50% of any trip that comes from outside the boundary or goes from inside to outside the boundary.
Can you give me an example, just, Jimmy
Layman's.
Driver?
Yeah.
So I just have to, if you can make up a set of numbers so I understand that better.
Yeah, so someone could be driving. It's not a perfect system because of that 50% does try to get as close as possible to an average. But someone can be driving from 20 miles outside the boundary, and then we would capture 50% of those 20 miles from the start to get inside the boundary. Or someone could be traveling from 2 miles outside the boundary and then traveling 3 miles inside. So regardless of how long that trip is, we are accounting for half of those miles.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have a clarifying question. Under the solid waste tonnage, you said earlier, and I'm just clarifying that is only organic waste that's going to generate greenhouse gas emissions. That isn't transportation of solid waste or the generation of that product and the carbon embedded in that product once it's in the landfill.
Yeah, that's also a great question. So this is total waste generation, regardless of what type. After we input the total amount of waste tonnage, then we apply percentages of organic materials to tell our program how much of that total is going to actually emit certain amounts of methane.
And
So to answer your question again, that total represents all waste types, not just organics. It could represent rubber, it could represent plastics, etc.
okay, and this may be a question for our staff, but do we know if the numbers that were given to ICLEI were only the numbers over the Levita-bound transfer station scales, or if they included our C&D and other landfills in the county?
Madam Chair, this is Sean McClendon.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it only included the Levita Brown numbers and not necessarily the C&D material.
Okay, thank you. All right, you can continue. Thank you.
Just a few more slides for you all and some key takeaways for community-wide inventory. As mentioned previously, electricity usage is just over a third of all emissions. And based on a variety of factors, there are great opportunities for economic, climate, and social benefits through energy efficiency programs, grid decarbonization, and renewable procurement. Mobile combustion, also just over a third of the inventory of all emissions. Alachua County has excellent opportunity to leverage community-wide vehicle electrification and mode shift. An example of mode shift is just increasing transit and walking availability and biking opportunities. And also given the great potential and opportunity for renewable energy, when combining renewable energy with electrification and energy efficiency, the county would see enhanced greenhouse gas mitigation. And this potential comes from the close collaboration with Gainesville, as well as with GRU, as well as the geography of Florida and the ability to have distributed solar. And also, we don't want to forget the ability to take on recycling and composting programs to remove those other greenhouse gas emitting waste types from the waste streams. So those are the takeaways for community-wide. And then for government operations, similar to the community-wide, electricity consumption was the largest source of emissions. Again, there's just great potential for grid decarbonization, renewable procurement, and energy efficiency. And if you take on all these or any of these, electricity emissions would be greatly reduced. The vehicle fleet is the second largest source of emissions. So there is a great opportunity to not only electrify the fleet, but also audit fleet operations. Employee commute is the third largest source. And this is a great opportunity to reduce emissions through work from home and hybrid working options, employ public transit programs, and incentivizing walking and biking when the opportunity is available. And last but not least, building fuel combustion is the fourth largest source of emissions. While only 11%, this is a great potential to fully electrify heating systems and other heating applications to kind of just knock 11% of those emissions off the board. So with that, we have just next steps. We do want to mention that, ICLEI provides climate action planning support, whether it is fee for service or through technical support, or through our guidance and toolkits. ICLEI does provide a whole range of resources and support. We did want to mention that a lot of our communities at this point, a lot of our ICLEI members are taking on integrated climate action, which is both mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation would be, improving your forecast, because ICLEI did provide a basic BAU forecast. This would be taking on high impact actions and science-based targets, doing a wedge analysis, and then internal planning for mitigation. And then for adaptation, this would be taking on a vulnerability assessment and then adaptation and resilience planning. And last but not least, just a few general principles for the next steps. I did mention a science-based target, but I do want to make it clear that at this point, we are telling all of our members that it is critical to have a 2030 science-based target, because science-based targets are targets based on the latest climate science. Planning should also be made in concert with rapidly changing trends around grid decarbonization and the advancement of certain technologies such as EVs. Programs should take a holistic approach We provide, high impact actions that achieve the largest emissions reductions that are necessary, but not even emissions reductions is sufficient. We believe the best programs are those that create tangible local benefit, such as creating healthy cities, while also addressing community resilience and equity. Local government action should not take place by itself. It really should take place in concert with state, utility, and federal policies and programs. And again, as I mentioned previously, this is there's great opportunity for collaboration between the city and the county, as well as the utility. And then last but not least, inventories provide the foundation for informed decision-making and transparency. The question really is not whether or not to create an inventory and when to do it, but how to do it efficiently with what level of effort proportional to the given county's needs. So again, you want to take on inventories for informed decision-making and transparency, but at the same time, you do want to really just jump into climate action planning to bolster mitigation and adaptation needs.
Thank you.
And with that, yeah. And certainly reach out to me if you have any other questions. I can certainly answer them now if you do.
We do have some questions. Mary, Commissioner Alford.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Good presentation. Since this was a 2019 report, do you have any estimates of how other places have changed during the COVID era so that we might have some data to support changing employee commutes, for instance, and work from home options?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually discussed that last time I presented for Alachua County. We do have data that shows data across multiple platforms and that shows VMT, vehicle miles traveled for the community, rose dropped dramatically during COVID. Most communities saw anywhere from like 15 to 30% decrease in VMT during 2020. So that was certainly a pattern that was uniform across the board for U.S. communities. In terms of electricity consumption and natural gas consumption, it really was dependent on the community. I would say some communities saw increases in residential energy consumption, but it wasn't extremely substantial. Regardless if you are in your home or not, most of the time your AC is still running, your electricity is still running. So that increase wasn't substantial. I would say if you had a work from home option and employees were all working from home or a substantial amount, you would see an increased amount of residential electricity consumption. However, you have to do a comparative analysis to see if it would improve total emissions if they were to, again, work from home rather than driving in every day. I would say that the benefits would certainly outweigh if they were to work from home rather than just driving in every day and also working in an office.
And so the effort would have to be modifying our commercial and government buildings to operate more efficiently with fewer people. Air conditioning systems. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you want to address any type of buildings within a climate action plan. So obviously making sure that the commercial buildings are as efficient as possible, especially if they're not. If people are working from home, you want to make sure that they have certain settings where they're operating without people in them. But you also want to make sure that residential energy efficiency programs are certainly active, so people's homes are operating as efficient as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you for the presentation. I always appreciate the work we get at the city and the county from ECLA. I wanted to let you all know that regarding working with federal and state government, Lord knows what we'll get out of state government, but the city of Gainesville has an active, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but an active grant proposal to the FDOT, the federal DOT, US DOT, for about $13 to $14 million for electric buses. We put in a $25, $26 million proposal for upgrading our fleet in general for RTS. We got some of that 11.6 million to purchase more efficient diesel buses to replace the least efficient buses in the fleet. And that is in process, as well as to build a transit hub on Hawthorne Road. But we do still have an active proposal out for more than $10 million for electric buses.
What's
So-
the anticipated timeline on hearing about that?
Well, this was about a month ago that we heard.
It's a rolling.
Yeah,
It's annual, yeah.
yeah. And there is a lot of activity at USDOT in this regard to upgrade bus fleets. So we're hopeful, and they gave us some input on how we might be more successful in the next piece of that. And that ends up being, probably 10, 12 buses, electric buses, out of a fleet of 130 some. So that's out there. There was a mention of stationary burning. That if I understand that correctly, what you're talking about is burning whatever it is on site. Is that accurate? So if you take down a few acres of trees to build something, you're talking about burning on site. Is that right, Mr. Katz?
Yes. When I say stationary fuel combustion, that really means any heating application inside of a home, inside of a commercial business, et cetera. So that could be climate control, using some amount of heat for climate control. That could be heating applications for cooking or for water heating, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that most often is natural gas or propane, kerosene, et cetera.
Okay. So this probably isn't that, but I can't think of a better time to ask it, so I'm going to put it in there anyway. I don't know what county regulations are for burning tree waste, trees that have come down, that have been taken down on site is. We would love to use that as fuel at the biomass plant. If trees are going to be burned, I'd much rather they be burned for energy production than to just release all that for nothing. And that happens a fair bit. Over the next decade, there's going to be a lot more of that. You know, as I watch the plans that are out there west of I-75. So how can we help you all at the county? How can the city help the county provide incentives or prohibitions against that and get as much of that into Deerhaven Renewables as possible?
Before we leave that topic, I'll ask our team, is anybody from growth management on, or perhaps our EPD director can address what we have in our codes currently around burning? I believe we prohibit it in certain instances. I know we can't do a lot on regulating bona fide agricultural operations, so if they're a silviculture operation, we can't.
Right.
I don't think we can.
Good morning, Steve Hofstadter, Environmental Protection Department. It's mainly regulated through the Florida Forest Service in their burning permits. But we could collaborate with them and see what can be done in terms of doing more promotion with getting that material to the biomass plant as opposed to on-site burning.
So and to be clear, I'm not talking about controlled burning and things
Correct.
like that. I'm talking about when, for instance, about a year ago, there was some land cleared on 39th Avenue west of the city limits. And actually, it may have been, it wasn't 39th, it was 23rd, for a new housing development. And there was a huge pile of trees in the middle of the property that, one weekend just burned. So anything we can do to start something different on that would be really useful, and I'm willing to talk about incentives and all that sort of thing.
Well, we'll reach out to Florida Forest Service to see what authority we do have, if any. And if we do, then we can collaborate that and possibly put that into, county comp planning code policy.
Very good, thank you.
Currently, I don't think we have much authority there, but we'll definitely investigate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We can bring that back with anything we do have in our code at a
Absolutely.
future meeting. Okay,
We'll
great.
do
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Are you through? Okay.
I'd like to, because I want to address that question.
Okay.
So one of the issues is the Title V permit, which restricts what can be burned and where it comes from. And we have a I don't want to call it a cradle to grave, but a chain of custody for all wood so that we can verify that we are burning wood waste and not trees like people want to say we are. So I think one of the biggest things that we could do is modify the Title V permit to allow anyone to bring wood waste, and then to also modify the Title V permit to allow small quantities of plastic to be burned, because that's why we can't burn yard waste. It's because we have a limitation on zero products besides wood, and so allowing, and I'm not saying we should burn plastic, but if we could have an allowance for, you know,
Like de minimis.
de minimis, 0.1% or something, that could truly change how Deerhaven Renewable is operated. We looked into that on the UAB a bit. Okay.
Excellent. All right. I think you're up. Yep.
A couple of points. I think one of the reasons that the biomass was sold in the beginning was to talk about using yard waste. And from what I understand in conversations I've had since that, it depends on who the hauler is as to whether they want to actually be involved in that or not. So we need to talk to the haulers as well to find out what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do, because it's a lot easier just to take big logs down and chip them than it is to scoop up all of this stuff out, off the field.
Yeah, but it's certainly done at other facilities. So, yeah.
Be glad to have it. But the other question, to follow up on your comment too about the date of this inventory, Mr. Katz, have you all been paying attention in Gainesville and Alachua County to the growth that's happened here in the last couple of years? I mean, it's pretty amazing, the growth, and how that would affect your figures here currently.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do get questions often like that. The way the climate action planning process works, following a baseline inventory, and I guess to preface, inventories most often take place, or baseline inventories most often represent a couple years, in the past, just because the data is fully available. Because again, sometimes if you were to do an inventory for the year before, accurate data is just not there yet. So that's the reason why 2019 is the baseline year. We would have recommended 2020 be the baseline year if it wasn't, an atypical year for obvious reasons. But to kind of walk you through at a high level, the approach we take for climate action planning is, after the baseline inventory is done, we do a forecast of future emissions. So that forecast will, we'll look at emissions from 2019 and so on to 2030 or 2050. And with that, we forecast those emissions and that activity based on what you just said, population growth and other types of growth rates, whether it's commercial growth rates and related growth rates. So we do consider the type of growth that Alachua County and then Gainesville is having, when we are doing the climate action planning.
Okay.
When it comes to actually, yep.
No, and one other question too, on your next steps page, we were talking about how do you mitigate this? And adaptation. I guess adaptation would accommodate growth concerns and questions, but how would these things be mitigated? I'm seeing the improved forecast, and a high impact on actions, wedge analysis, internal planning. I'm not sure what is that mitigation, the word. Usually I'm used to seeing the word mitigate. What do you do to make up for something that that was lost?
Yeah, so when we mean mitigation, we're really trying to focus on not emitting further greenhouse gas emissions from the air. Okay. When we're talking about, because again, the emissions that were from 2019 and 2020, 2021, and so on, are already in the air. At that point, the only way to really physically remove them from the air is through sequestration, which would be, for example, using nature-based solutions such as trees and wetlands to remove emissions. However, that's not as impactful as one may think. So in terms of mitigation, one would go about climate action planning. So when we say climate action planning, first and foremost, when you do have your forecast all ready to go, you want to develop mitigation strategies, or what we call mitigation measures. Those measures are sector specific. So in the energy sector, they can relate to energy efficiency. They can relate to renewable energy. They can relate to electrification. For transportation, it can relate to electric vehicles or transportation efficiency, something like that. So really, it does relate to the sector, but the common denominator is reducing that activity or reducing the grid's intensity. And therefore, if you take on any of those, you would be reducing the amount of emissions from the future years.
Okay, so if we just try to encourage people to use less electricity, that would be a part of that plan too? Just turn it off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be, I guess as you know, it's a little easier said than done, but yeah, part of a climate action plan is often, educational programs to educate community members on, how their, every day-to-day electricity consumption does impact the community members as a whole in global, humanity as a whole. But also, again, part of the more impactful approaches would be actual programs for energy efficiency, renewable energy, et cetera. That way, you're not only reducing emissions, but you're also helping homeowners, business owners, et cetera, reduce costs on an annual basis.
Thank you, sir.
Mr.
Thank you, Madam
Katz.
Chair.
And we'll be having future conversations at this board about our climate action planning, which will include a lot of those steps, I think. I don't see any other lights on. I just have one question in relation to this, and it relates to Commissioner Ward's comment about state and federal partnerships. Can someone give us an update on our DOA technical assistance grant? I know that we applied on that, and that has a lot to do with distributed solar energy and energy efficiency updates and community partnerships. And I think this might be an appropriate time to get a quick update on that. If Mr. McClendon is on the line, perhaps.
Madam Chair, Sean McClendon, Alachua County.
Thank you.
So the county and the city of Gainesville, GRU, and most importantly, our community partners over at the Community Weatherization Coalition, as well as the NAACP, joined together to put forward a request for technical assistance to the Department of Energy to develop a local energy action plan, the LEAP program. This is a technical assistance program that will take about over a year or so. And in the end, it investigates a couple of different threads of interest in this community, specifically within communities that are highly energy burdened. So it's targeted for census tracts within the Gainesville metropolitan area that experience high energy burden and also meet criteria for environmental justice questions. And working with these community groups, we hope to investigate the use of, as you said, distributed solar, and we have a keen interest in the opportunity for microgrid. That's having distributed solar alongside of some form of battery backup system for greater resilience in neighborhoods, but also look for job opportunities, because a big part of the DOE work and the concern principally coming out of the federal government is that as we make this great leap forward in a new energy future, hopefully a greener energy future, we don't want to leave behind these extremely low income and energy burdened communities in the transformation. So this is a way of going directly into these communities and asking them what is important and how can we help you be a part of this transition. And that's what we'll begin exploring with DOE over the coming months. Our first conversation is going to happen, I believe, this week with DOE as we get oriented on how to go forward, and we hope to bring back some updates to the joint board in the future.
Great, thank you so much. It's great news that you all were successful in that grant application. A big thanks to our community partners and to all the teams from the city and the county that worked on that. It's a big win for us. I think we're one of only, 20 or 20 somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 communities across the country that got that. So pretty exciting.
Yes, ma'am. And just a quick shout out to our partners in this is that it was 22 in the entire United States, and Gainesville, Alachua County was the only one in the state of Florida. The only one in the state of Florida.
Nice work, nice work. All right, seeing no other lights, thank you to Mr. Katz for his presentation, and we'll move on to our next agenda item, 211120, Alachua County Climate Vulnerability Analysis. And I believe we have our EPD folks here to talk about that, or perhaps JEA.
Good morning, Madam Chair. This presentation will be the first major update on the county's climate vulnerability analysis. We're at the conclusion of our task one, which is the qualitative view of what climate science says we can expect in Alachua County and in our municipalities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Justin Gregory, who is from Jones Edmonds, who is performing the work for us. Justin?
So as Shane said, Justin Gregory with Jones Edmonds and Associates, and I'm going to be presenting on task one of the critical infrastructure and land use vulnerability analysis that we are wrapping up. And I should say, and we're working with a great team on this of both local, state, and national experts on vulnerability analyses. Next slide. So just a project overview. The project is split up into 3 tasks. The first task, as Shane said, is really a qualitative review of other studies and existing literature on climate change and the threats that face the county. Task 2 will be looking at location of critical infrastructure to flooding countywide, including incorporated and unincorporated parts of the county. And task 3 is an assessment of increased climate change, looking at neighborhoods and cultural resources and what their vulnerabilities are to those threats. So next slide. There's going to be a few animations on this, so you can go to the next. Sorry. So we've looked at a number of different aspects as part of task 1 of climate change, a number of different threats. This includes seasonal changes in precipitation and drought, changes to surface and groundwater hydrology, the effects of climate migration on population projections for the county, and then also changes to local and regional water use. Sorry, one more. Extreme temperatures and and what those threats are to the county. Wildfire risk is going to be another, I was going through these pretty quickly. Well, wildfire risks and what those threats are going to be to the county in the future under climate change. The changes to county food systems and agricultural production. We know that climate change is going to impact that and starting to look at that. And then extreme precipitation, storm events. So how is the weather going to change and how is that going to impact flooding going forward? And finally, we've included a stakeholder engagement portion in this task, and that will be rolled out pretty soon. So I'll be giving a few more details on these tasks over the next few slides. So seasonal changes in rainfall and drought. Now, one thing when we're looking at climate change, it's important to note that there is a lot of a wide level of confidence in some of the projections that are out there. So rainfall and drought are one of the ones that have lower confidence just in the climate models. But we have looked at what the literature shows as far as impacts to annual rainfall. And you can see that the chart there is from the NOAA Atlas 14, the NOAA climate tools. And you can see what it's showing is a slight increase in potential rainfall. The middle line there is the average historic annual precipitation. For Alachua County, we can see a slight increase, but really a lot of noise in all the models, so a lot of uncertainty in what those long-term projected average annual rainfall is going to be. So there's some of the literature has noted a potential for extended dry periods, but we have also some of the other literature showing that we might have wetter dry periods and drier wet periods, if you will. So kind of a lot of uncertainty in how that rain is going to be distributed within the year. Now, we are pretty confident that there's going to be increased evapotranspiration. We know that evapotranspiration increases with increased temperature, so a lot of confidence in increased ET. We have, as far as tropical storm goes, that there is some kind of a variety of levels of confidence in that. Some of the models are showing that there's going to be a decrease in tropical activity generally overall, so the number of tropical storms may decrease given wind shear in the Atlantic and other changes to weather patterns, but that the number of extreme events is going to increase. So Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, we'll see more of those, but less overall of the, and I should say that's still, there is debate in the literature on that. The extreme increases in extreme rainfall, there is a lot of confidence in that. We can see that in historic data. There is a trend for increasing frequency of extreme storm events, and the climate models are confirming that and projecting that out into the future, continuing to increase in extreme rainfall, the number of extreme rainfall events we will see. Next slide. So changes to surface and groundwater hydrology. Once again, this is all generally driven by that long-term rainfall, in which there is a lot of uncertainty. So the St. Johns River Water Management District did a study in 2011, 2012 that looked at projections of climate change on their district-wide models. And for Alachua County, they showed a variety of impacts with potentially increasing or decreasing long-term average runoff. The Army Corps of Engineers has a climate hydrology assessment tool, and the figure there is coming from that tool. And you can see that they are showing really no statistically significant change, but visually you can see there is a slight increase in runoff response, but there is a lot of noise in that data, so difficult to be sure, and that's for the Santa Fe Basin. So difficult to be sure exactly what those long-term trends will be. On the water quality side, there are concerns. We know that with increased temperature, we see increased likelihood of algal blooms. We also know that we'll be getting to it a little later, but there is the potential for additional fertilizer requirements in agriculture and other threats which can negatively impact our water quality of our lakes and our river systems and the aquifer. Next slide, please. So one of the exciting parts so far that we've been able to work with Bieber at the University of Florida, and they have used this opportunity of working with us to update their statewide population forecast models, both extended those and then also incorporated the most recent science on climate change, climate migration. So we've been able to take, earlier this year, NOAA released some new sea level rise projections, and Bieber has updated their models and taken the most recent science on climate migration and is forecasting and has developed a forecast for population in Alachua County. And we can see that this figure shows how that is impacted by climate migration. So this is the most recent updates, and then part of later tasks, we'll be refining this a little more to make that a more spatial projection so that we have an idea of which portions of the community that will impact. Okay, next slide. So changes to local and ground regional water use. There have been a number of studies that are obviously looking at this. The North Florida Regional Water Supply Plan looks at long-term water use projections. Most of those studies have not directly accounted for climate change. I know that the studies are looking at ways to mitigate it and understand that it's going to have an impact. But we do know, even without climate change, we know that there is a forecast for an increase in water supply needs in Alachua County. And then when we add climate change onto that, we expect that to be exacerbated. So definitely a lot of work to do on that, and we'll be looking at that as part of our future tasks. And that's driven both by population changes and also irrigation demands. Based on our initial review of impacts to agriculture, it looks like there might be a need for more irrigation moving forward, which would increase that water supply need. Next. So temperature, we've looked at temperature changes. There are a lot of tools and ways to look at the climate models and how those impact temperatures. We can see that that's a chart provided by NOAA showing under both a low emission scenario and a high emission scenario how the number of days with the maximum temperature above 95, so those extremely hot days, is likely to increase. So going from 11 now is about the average, going up to more than 70 by 2100. So, and there's a fair amount of confidence in those models on temperature. That's one of the more the parameters that we can more confidently predict. So we can see a significant increase in extreme temperature events, as you will. And we'll be looking at how that impacts the community as part of Task 3. Next slide. So the number of freeze days, we can see that the number of days where we have freezing conditions is forecast to decrease. Currently, we average about 17 days a year, and that's forecast to go down to 6. That's something else that can impact water quality and vegetation growth. So obviously a lot of impacts based on those fewer number of freeze events. Next slide. So the number of days with the minimum temperature above 80, this starts having an impact on air conditioning needs, where you really need to be running your air conditioning all night. So that's set. Currently, we generally have 0 days where the minimum temperature is above 80, and that's set to increase to more than 10 at least, depending on the different emission scenario. It could be as high as, I'm going up close to above 50. So once again, a lot of variation in those forecasts.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. That means that overnight, the low temperature does not drop below 80 degrees?
Correct.
At all?
Correct.
That's disgusting.
Yes, so that's the point at which air conditioning becomes almost critical, and you need to be running that all night too. Okay, next slide. So wildfire risk, another important part, and we've looked at some of the literature on this. We know there's a number of drivers of wildfire risk. One of the most important of those is the wildland urban interface, the WUR. So that is the interface between urban developed areas and our more forested natural areas where wildfires occur. We know that between 1990 and 2010, there was almost a 30% increase in that interface within Alachua County. Unfortunately, the most recent census results have not been, WUR has not been updated with the most recent census results, but we're expecting that boundary is going to increase and expand across the county. So that area becomes, it is a key area because it's where wildfire is more likely to start. It's also where you're likely to get impacts from on infrastructure from wildfires, and it's also a concern because it's difficult to fight wildfires in those areas. It's definitely challenging. It's kind of where you're at most risk to wildfires. The climate does play a significant role in wildfire risk as well. We know that there's a number of climate indices that help predict wildfire and are used to manage our wildfire risk. And various studies have looked at those both globally. There is a significant increase in wildfire risk around the world due to climate change. And then in the southeast, those studies have also predicted the number of days when we are very vulnerable to wildfire to increase. So we'll be looking at that in more detail, more locally, as part of a later task. There's also been a lot of literature recently looking at the effects of hurricanes on wildfire, and those effects spread inland. So some of the recent studies looking at Hurricane Michael looks at the effects of forests about 100 miles inland from Hurricane Michael and just how those can impact and increase fire risks. And then unfortunately, while we were working on this project, the Bertha Swamp Road fire in the Panhandle occurred, and that was almost directly attributed to the extent and the magnitude of that fire was directly attributed to Hurricane Michael and the impacts it had on those forests. So with increased number of extreme rainfall storm events, we'd expect to see increase in fuel loads due to that. One of the good news with wildfire is that I know Florida is leading the nation at the moment in managing fuel loads, and Alachua, the foresters we work with said Alachua County is one of the leading examples of that. So definitely it's trying to control that fuel load is critical, and it's something the county is doing a good job of, and it can help, in the forward, can help us mitigate, moving forward, can help us mitigate those increased risks. Next. So far, we've looked at kind of some general projections regionally for agriculture, and we found that there is the projections are showing that there is going to be an increase in irrigation need. I know Alachua County currently has relatively low irrigation relative to other counties, so we're projecting that the literature is showing that generally that's probably going to increase, that we're going to need to provide more irrigation to get the same yield. Potentially also more fertilizer inputs are going to be required to achieve the same yields. So for now, what we've done is we've focused on trying to identify what types of agriculture are predominant in the county, and then we'll be working in a later task to work with a crop modeler to actually see what those impacts are going to be of climate change, and then how those can potentially be offset through increased irrigation or fertilizer application. Next. So flooding is an important part of this project. We know FEMA mapping obviously provides a basis for some of the flood risk in the county. In addition, the county and the city City of Gainesville both maintain great databases of where flooding has occurred. So we are using that information and currently working on setting up a county-wide flood risk model. Next slide. That will just, yes.
Are you only using existing data and past data, or are you incorporating some of the modeling of rainfall or any other climate change related modeling into that flooding?
As part of this project, we'll be developing a brand new county-wide flood model that we're looking at flood risk, so that we can understand. There's a limited amount of information out there across the county that's consistent and provides us kind of a detailed look at flood risk across the county. So a large portion of this project will be focused on that modeling effort.
So including potential projections of rainfall and other of the data you just
Correct,
presented.
and on the next slide, I'll show you how we'll be including those.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thanks. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, one of the kind of items that we're most confident in is that extreme rainfall is going to increase. We can see this trend in historic data as well as in the global climate change models are showing us that extreme rainfall is going to increase. So were recently published at the end of last year by FIU. They did a study looking at what they term change factors, so how we expect the extreme rainfall events to change. So when you look at these numbers, you can see, depending on how you look at the statistics, it could be that these rainfall depths could almost double for some storm events. But if you look at kind of the more reasonable expectations, your 100-year event, what we now consider a 1% event every year, is probably going to occur twice as frequently by 2069. So in that 2030 to 2069 period, it is going to occur twice as often, and then a little even more frequently when we get out to 2099. So these change factors are being developed now. There's a lot of work in the state trying to develop these change factors so that moving forward, stormwater design and flood design can account for future rainfall rather than historic rainfall. And we're proposing to use these as the basis for evaluating those future rainfall risks or flooding risks within the county.
Would that be redefining the 100-year, 500-year flood maps then?
No, those are defined by FEMA, and we would not be able to redefine those. The official FEMA mapping.
The official would obviously.
Yes, would stay the same. But we would be looking at what the new 100-year storm would be and what the new 500-year storm would be.
Thank you.
Next slide. So we're currently finalizing the draft report, working with the county just to wrap that up. And that report provides an overview of all the literature we've looked at and kind of the status of the science. We've included a very detailed, on the next slide, I think we had just a very detailed bibliography, just summarizing all the references that we could identify pertaining to the county, and just kind of giving a good backdrop for the start of the rest of the study and actually doing some more detailed quantitative type analyses. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we're also working on stakeholder outreach, and I think that we've developed a countywide public survey on climate change or weather-related risk factors, determining it, and that is going to be rolled out fairly soon. So trying to get input from the community on what their concerns are and what their priorities are. Next slide. And then, so just a summary, just the projected changes. I know I went through a lot of them, so try to put them all on one slide. We're expecting, with increased temperatures, we have a high confidence in that, and that those average temperatures and extreme temperatures, we're pretty confident are going to increase moving forward. With tropical storms, I say it's a little lower confidence, but currently the science is saying that there's going to be fewer smaller storms, so fewer Category 1, 2, and 3 storms, but more Category 4 and 5 storms, so more extreme storms. The extreme rainfall events, we're pretty confident that those are going to increase. That's one of the areas that we are confident in, is that extreme rainfall events, the frequency of those is going to increase. Increased evapotranspiration, we know that is something that's going to impact the community, and it's something we can project fairly confidently. As far as the rainfall distribution between wet season and dry season within the year, there's a lot less confidence in that, and there's still some debate in the literature exactly how that's going to impact the community. Increased wildfire risk, we know fairly confidently that increased temperature, increased fuel loads, we are likely to see an increase in wildfire risk. And then the population, obviously a lot of population, the climate migration to Alachua County is going to be driven by sea level rise, which there is a lot of confidence in. So that is a high confidence impact to the county. And thank you. I think that was it. One more. Oh, sorry, next steps. Yeah, so we're currently working on starting the modeling phase of the flood vulnerability. So looking at developing a county-wide model of flood risk. And then and that will be the focus of task 2 and identifying impacts to infrastructure of that flooding. And then task 3 is going to focus on impacts to communities and neighborhoods across the county of a variety of threats.
Thank you. All right, I believe we do have some questions. Commissioner Wheeler.
Just very quickly, the impact of the neighborhood on the study 3 may be taken care of. What I was concerned about was mosquito-borne diseases, as we look at more water and more heat, we have to worry about vaccination.
Yes, that's a great.
And things like that,
Yes, and fewer freeze events in the year as well to control mosquito population.
And also, I guess, in terms of labor practices, the heat of the day, people are going to have a harder time working outside, that we may see a shift in the way people work more
Yes.
at night rather than
During
the heat of the day, that sort of thing. So I'm sure you guys will be, when you're talking to your farmers, you'll be addressing that too. But
Yes.
I know one of the big things that I've been concerned about as related to insects is, screens. Make sure that we're doing more screening on porches as we build going forward, because as we have trouble now with air conditioning and being able to pay for it, if we're going to be using it more, we need to be able to give people an option from air conditioning it at least to a screened porch.
Yes.
So
Somewhere safe.
that, and that's a double protection then against, these mosquitoes, but also high bills that will not be affordable too. So thank you for your work. This is exciting to me.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Great point.
I think Commissioner Alford.
I made a bunch of little tabs. I apologize. Oh, first, I didn't catch your name. Can I?
Justin Gregory.
Justin Gregory. Okay. So first, on the slide that talks about the effects of climate migration on population projections, I believe I might have talked about this before. You're taking into account in these projections the increase in sea level rise and how many people that's going to force or, impel them to move inland, or are you just looking at trends in population increase now? What are the...
And there's 2 lines shown and 2 charts shown on that. The lower one is just that the current projecting model that BEBA uses across the state to project population change. So that's what the university is using. That the other line showing the higher population change, that is based on them including some of the most recent literature on climate migration. There's a number of studies recently that have looked at how sea level rise is going to impact climate migration and where people are likely to move to when the sea level rise comes up. So that second line is based on that science.
Is there any sort of sensitivity analysis on a major weather event and how that might change that? So for instance, if we had a Katrina event, along the Space Coast somewhere, then you might have, similarly to how New Orleans residents all moved to Houston and various other communities inland in Texas and Louisiana, some communities seeing a huge increase in population over a very short time. Would that be is that type of growth at all accounted for in this model?
My understanding is not just based on the papers we read and that BEBA is using, is that it's more just looking at general trends rather than as trends for a specific event that could obviously change that trajectory significantly.
Well, as I look at emergency management planning and things like that, that's the type of event that I think it would be useful to have at least, some thought about. I don't know how you can project that other than
Yes.
looking at past, migratory. It's really out of the scope of what you're offering, but I was curious if, any of this took into account disaster-related.
And I can confirm with BEBA, but my understanding is that no, it was just looking at general
Okay.
projections of.
Secondly, on the wildfire risk slide, there's this lovely map. What does it mean?
That is showing the wild and urban. So that's a map published by the state foresters, and it's a great resource. They have it's a map showing the wild and urban interface risk, I think, index. It should be on there, but it's a combination of looking at fuel loads and the wild and urban interface. So that those are kind of 2 of your primary risks when it comes to wildfire, and that map combines the 2 of them.
Right, okay, that's interesting. And then, so on the projected irrigation increase, does that take into account both growth in population and lost farmland due to that increased population, or is it just based on the current?
The current, the North Florida Regional Water Supply Planning, I would have to go back and check
Okay.
exactly what I know that they were forecasting an increase in irrigation, but I'd have to look what that was based on.
This one's up here. Oh, can we preview the survey before it goes out, just out of curiosity?
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure you can.
I feel like I'm missing. Oh, here's another question I had. On these graphs here, where you've got the line that says 2006,
Yes.
I know that on some of these, it looks like some of the data, like these, there's a line about where 2006 is, and it looks like data like moves up to maybe like 2013. Do we have any more updated data? Because some of this is like 7 to 15 years old, it looks like.
Yes, so a lot of that data, and that's looking in the literature, what we identified is a lot of the data, there is a global kind of effort to model climate change it's called the CMIP project, and recently CMIP 6 has just come out, so a lot of the graphs and the figures that are on the existing literature are based on what was called CMIP 5. CMIP 6, it hasn't been fully released, but it is being published, all the data sets have come out, and the interpretation of it has not been fully released. So we'll be looking at CMIP 6 where possible moving forward, which extends that baseline to a lot closer.
Okay, and we don't have any estimation of when that will be, the CMIP 6?
CMIP 6, so they started releasing it towards the end of last year, and the final report will be released later this year. We have the data, and we're planning on using that for our more county-specific, we actually quantify. We'll be looking at climate change values from that CMIP 6 project to try and give the county something using the most recent science. I know some of the modelers on our team recommended using CMIP 6. It's just a more modern, more kind of comprehensive look at climate change.
Yeah, so we can expect in the final reports that it'll be that more recent data.
Yes,
Yeah,
where
okay,
we
just to
can,
clarify.
where we can use CMIP 6, we propose using.
Okay. And I think that was all of my questions. Thank you.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any, I believe that was everybody whose lights are on. Anybody else have any other questions? I do have one quick question. I wonder, you said you were deploying the community survey. It sounds like there would be some interest in getting it out to the boards to take a look at, but my question was more with how that's going to be deployed and how we'll ensure that, everyone has an opportunity to fill that out. People who maybe don't have as much internet access. We have a lot of parts of our county that have really pretty limited internet access. Possibly people who don't have, home computers or things like that. Will we be doing any outreach to communities or working with neighborhood associations, things like that, to get results?
Yes, and my understanding is that I know we had spoken about developing a translation into Spanish, I think. But yes, there has been a lot of discussion.
Thank you. Stacy Greco with Alachua County Environmental Protection Department. I've been the staff point of contact with the consultants that are working on that, and we have been working with the Climate Advisory Committee too on that draft, and our equity officer at the county, but we can get that draft out. It is going to be an online survey. Excuse me. And one option is they will look at the demographics to see if that meets who we're trying to hear from as they deploy it. And if it does not seem like it is getting the populations we want to get to, so it will be on social media, it will be through a press release, it will be through emails. I know, for example, the Community Weatherization Coalition said they would help me get that out there to the public. We have talked about doing some flyers and hanging them up around town, but that would be a QR code, so that would mean someone would have to have a smartphone to do it. We've talked about potentially going to community events with some iPads so that people could fill it out if it looks like our first wave of efforts are not, meeting the targets for who's getting that survey.
Okay. I guess I would also ask that we reach out to our partners that are helping us with the DOE Technical Assistance Grant, the Cultural Arts Coalition, and the NAACP's Climate and Environmental Advisory Committee, and possibly they may have some suggestions for ways to get the word out as well.
Absolutely. We have a Google Doc that's been shared through those channels, asking people to provide any contact information of who would be some key community members to help us get people to answer the survey. But we'll continue to work with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wheeler.
Very quickly, I would just, again, recommend that if you're doing a survey like this that requires the technology, the high schools, the science classes, or any of these places in the high schools are coming from the outlying areas too, that they would have access to the technology at the school so that they could actually respond. They're smart kids. They've been well educated right here in Alachua County, so they should be able to answer that kind of a survey.
Great idea, thank you.
And Commissioner Alford, did you have something brief? Okay. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, seeing no other comments or questions, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We look forward to the report. All right, moving on to our final agenda item of the day, 211122 Gainesville Floodwise Communities Vulnerability Assessment. Hello, welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you? Gail Morey, City of Gainesville Public Works, and I'm here to give an update about the Floodwise Communities Vulnerability Assessment. And I think most of us are familiar with Floodwise, but they are a community and an organization that works to help cities and towns plan for extreme weather events. And last year in July, the City of Gainesville and Alachua County were both selected from the Gulf Coast communities, and there are about 60 communities that were selected. The team members involved folks from sustainability development, equity and inclusion, Public Works Stormwater, GIS, and GRU, and a few folks are here from the team. If you guys want to maybe wave. Okay. And then we went by Floodwise's schedule with a proposed schedule to originally end in February of 2022. We actually extended that, and I'll explain why. We did a little more work than what the actual Floodwise vulnerability assessment is. We added a component to it. Sorry, next slide. So ours was a self-guided vulnerability assessment. There were communities that actually got help from Floodwise communities. We did self-guided, but basically we looked at the individual components of our stormwater system. We ranked their vulnerabilities based on the criteria that was established by Floodwise, and then that tool online that we utilize generates a report with graphics, and I'll show you an example at the end. But we decided early on that we needed to expand the effort. We needed to look at the identification and mapping of our critical assets so that we could go ahead and identify the potentially impacted critical assets. That way it would help us be in a better position for grant applications, particularly the Resilient Florida grants. Next slide, sorry. I'm used to having the clicker. So the overall intent for vulnerability assessment is to look at adaptation and mitigation planning. Where do we have problems and where do we need to fix them? This vulnerability assessment will also help us with grants, budget, and project proposals. And then the overall goal is obviously to improve our community resilience to extreme weather events and climate conditions. Next slide. I'm not going to talk a ton about the Floodwise resources, but they did provide us a couple things. We will talk about the tool, the one on the bottom left, but they also provided us some climate information and weather and climate information. Justin's gone over a large portion of that, and actually his investigation was much more detailed than what Floodwise gave us, so I'm going to kind of just skip through those slides. There are probably 2 or 3 more of those. But you have the general gist. In general, it's getting hotter, and it's going to get wetter. So, and we'll have more extreme dry periods, potentially more extreme wet periods, and more intense rain events. me go ahead and skip through that slide. And one more. Thank you. So there were two main efforts for us when we looked at this vulnerability assessment. One was the actual component assessment by FloodWise, looking at how sensitive a component was and how adaptable it was. And the components that we looked at were conventional and low impact development type components. And next slide, thank you. So conventional being those culverts, pipes, catch basins, all those things we typically see. We do actually have a couple levees, one flood wall, and then the GRU facilities. Next slide. Low impact development and natural components that we assess. We looked at natural stream channels, open ditches, dry and wet detention basins, those retention ponds, floodplains and infiltration basins. And the infiltration basins is another GRU item. So then we move into the mapping tool, and this is where we added that expanded effort. We did a lot of work with critical assets, and Catherine Michael, who is here in the corner, she did all of the heavy lifting with this, and I'll explain a little bit further. But the other component to the mapping tool was vulnerable tracts at risk. And for this, if you go into the next slide, we used a tool that was provided from FloodWise, and it actually belongs to Headwaters Economics. And it looks at, using the 2019 census tracts, it looks at 13 different components, 9 that are underneath the people column, 4 that are climate exposure. And this is where NIA helped us a lot with, from EEO, to help us identify what tracks, what criteria we needed to look at. And so for us, and it's a little hard to read, but you can see that we used housing units that were rentals, people of color and Hispanics, households with no car, and families in poverty. And so those were the 4 criteria that established in the end result, those 13 tracks that are highlighted in blue. And so as we went through our critical asset analysis and trying to determine which ones were vulnerable, we looked at citywide, and then we also looked at what was in the tracks at risk. And one of the things I'll mention, I'm sorry, just real quick, back on the rentals, we actually went with the national average for rentals because UF skews, the rentals associated with UF skewed that category so much we ended up removing some tracks out of consideration, and we wanted to maximize some of those tracks. So we actually used the national average for the housing, house rentals, sorry. Now you can go to the next slide. So from that tool from Headwaters, from there, this is where Catherine really went into the heavy lifting, and she created a GIS mapping tool that incorporated those vulnerable tracks and then all of the critical assets that we were looking at, including the GRU data, which is somewhat restricted, so we can't go into the live link here. But next slide. We started with the critical asset definition underneath Florida Statute 380.093. This is associated with the statewide flooding and sea level rise resilience plan. And so we worked with many departments, our own departments, county departments, and other agencies to try to pull all the information together so that we could get a valid representation of what the critical assets are. We also looked at affordable housing. And when I say we, it really was Catherine doing all the heavy lifting here. She did an amazing job with putting this together. But this gives you a general idea of what we were looking at here. The affordable housing information that we got was utilized from Schimberg, the Schimberg Center at UF. And last slide. And then this is a slide that we looked at the First Street flood model. And so they gave us information for 2021, 2036, and 2051. And what you're looking at here is 2021. And you can see this is in depth, basically in inches. So green is the shallower depths. And as you go up into the orange, I think there's a couple reds here and there. You'll see those are the higher depths, the deeper water. And so from here, we're also going to be looking at interpolating to the 2070 horizon. So ultimately, one of the things that we'll, and I'll talk about a little further with some of the figures that we provided, we'll be looking at where is that flooding and where are those critical assets and do they overlap? So the next slide is we'll move on into just the results. So this is the FloodWise final report result. This is their matrix. So as we scored each component for sensitivity and adaptability, basically, if you're in the green category, that's the most desirable category. So being an S0 means that you're not sensitive at all to a rainfall event, an extreme rainfall event or drought event. So, and then as you move into the S4, you become more sensitive. So S4 being very sensitive to the predicted changes. So, and then as far as adaptability, when you look at an AC4, that means that you're pretty adaptable. Whatever is going on with that component, it can be pretty easily adapted, versus as you go up to the AC0, that means that it becomes not so adaptable. So for us, we ended up with one component in the green, and that happened to be in the infiltration basins associated with GRU's wastewater treatment facilities. And I'll give an example on, let's say 3, you can see where the 3 is. When you see 3, that means that there were 3 components. We had a total of 17. Where we have 3, that means we had 3 components that categorized in that area. So an example is catch basins and pipes. So for us, catch basins and pipes are very sensitive to increased rainfall events. We've all seen where catch basins, everybody's driven down the road before, and you've seen catch basins that were maybe overflowing during a very intense rainfall event. And that's because our general level of service for a storm event is a 10-year event. And so we also have old and aged infrastructure. So there are catch basins out there that were built before current regulations that do not capture a 10-year event. And so as far as sensitivity, they do become pretty sensitive to this change in, and we've all seen it, right? In some of these big events that we've had over the last couple of years, we've seen some of our catch basins get overwhelmed. And what happens, the road might flood. It might also move off into an adjacent property, but in general, we also see an increased amount of runoff continue to go somewhere where it probably wasn't supposed to go. Now, how adaptable are these? Again, they're somewhat limited just because you have land rights, easement cost, utilities that already exist. The cost of it can also be intensive, so it limits to a certain degree the adaptability of those systems. So that's one of the reasons why you see some of those in the orange category. That's why you would see something like that. Next slide. And then each component in the FloodWise report also gives a individual system component, the sensitivity score and adaptability score off to the right, and then the color coding through the report's helpful as you go along. And then the written up section, so on the next page. This is several pages deep. I only gave one as an example. So basically this walks you through like levees and how sensitive it is, and then the write-up that we did for this, but it's multiple pages. There's actually more categories and information that we've provided. So the report overall from FloodWise looks exactly like this. You have the matrix, you have the individual component, and then you have all the written write-up section. And then we get to the figures, and this is where we started doing the critical asset assessment and looking at what was happening with the critical assets. Go ahead to the next page. So in terms of mapping, this is a figure of the critical assets that we located within 1 mile of the municipal boundary. And we did this fairly generically as just a dot because it can get pretty overwhelming if you try to change it into a symbology that actually means something right now. But we did do that in some other figures. But you can see we do have quite a few critical assets throughout the city. Next slide. And then we used the 2021, 2036, and the 2051 First Street flood models. And I'm not sure if you guys can quite read that, I'm sorry. But bottom line is what we're looking at is the 2021 floodplain area within the municipal boundary is 9.2 square miles. And then what we also did was we wanted to look at the tracts at risk, and the 2021 floodplain area within the tracts at risk is 2.4 miles. So that's 25.9% of the floodplain. So all of our figures within the final report, and I'm only doing 2021 as a representation, but all of them will look like this. If you can maybe go to the next one. So this is where you see 2021 versus 2036. And you can see that there is a subtle difference. There is an increase. We go from 9.2 square miles to 10.1 square miles in the two models. So, and this is just an example. We flagged one of the areas so you could see what that looks like. And then you'll see for the 2036 floodplain within the tracts at risk, it goes up to 2.6. So we actually increase a little bit in terms of percentage. It went from 25.9 to 26.1. And then this is the 2051 incorporation. Now we leveled off in 2051 as far as floodplain size, and Justin and Shane could probably explain that a little more than I could, because I know that they look at those types of assessment a little more, but rainfall is cyclical, and it's possible that we might be on a slight downward trend in the flood model information that we're using from First Street. We didn't do that model specifically, we're using their information. Next slide. And then we did a potentially impacted critical facilities. This is identification of the 2021 First Street model. And so you can see those facilities identified there. Go ahead. And then what we also wanted to do was look at impacted roadways. So on this slide, or this figure, what you're seeing is in blue, all of the road segments, the entire length of the road segment that is affected by a potentially submerged road. And this is, again, based on just pure overlap of the model onto the road layer. And then what you're seeing in red is the actual submerged portion. So when we look at the overall length, we're talking about 127 plus miles of overall streets that would potentially be impacted. And those that are in the tracts at risk are 47.3, so that is 31.2%. So one of the reasons why we wanted to qualify that is there are going to be folks that are impacted overall who live on that street that there's flooding on. But when you talk about rebuilding of a road because of a submerged condition, because road base might have been impacted, asphalt would have been impacted. When you talk about what might happen to the pavement condition, it might only affect that particular portion. So we would probably end up looking at costs associated with that versus entire lengths. Next slide. So some of our next steps, and we do have a few. One of the next steps is actually looking at whether or not these potentially impacted critical assets are impacted, because it is potential. So it's just a straight overlay of one over the other. But what we're going to have to do is look at what are those actual elevations. Is the flood elevation here and the finished floor is up here? Or is it the other way around, and we might have more issues associated with those? So there's some more work we have to do with just identifying that information. We are going to continue to work with FloodWise to create a more robust report format online. We found some shortcomings. For instance, we can't attach any of these figures or any of the work that we did as part of our extra effort. That's not even part of FloodWise. That's something that we expanded because we wanted to make sure that we identified projects clearly, or potential adaptation projects clearly, in a document that could then be used for granting purposes. So we're going to end up looking at seeking funding for an adaptation plan for making critical assets more resilient. We're going to end up needing to look for funding for individual adaptation projects themselves. An example of this is the airport road culvert replacement project. We did submit last year to Resilient Florida. We were not selected, but we're going to try again this year. All of the potential adaptation projects that we're looking at are going to be put on the LMS initiative list. That is one of the criteria that we need to meet for the Resilient Florida. So we'll be, there's an extension on the LMS project list that goes out to June 1st. So if anybody else has any projects they need to add, it goes until June 1st. But we'll be putting those on initiative list. We're going to continue our cooperative efforts with Alachua County and Jones Edmonds. We've been working probably every month. We've been getting together, talk about critical assets in the development and what we might need to include or expand on. And then once the county's vulnerability assessment is completed, we're going to update the city's floodwise communities mapping tool more and adjust our proposed projects accordingly. And that's probably it for me, but I think that Rick Hutton is listening and might want to chime in on a couple things.
Mr. Hutton, are you there? Well, while we're...
Hello, hi.
Oh, there he is.
Hi.
Are you all able to
You're
hear
sideways.
me?
There you are. Okay.
All right. Hey,
Excellent.
I'm so sorry. I'm at a conference today and I could not join you all live, but I have a role in the conference that I'm at. Hey, I just wanted to say, well, I think Gail did a really good job of presenting, so I don't have a lot to add other than I know we are also working with the other departments in GRU to look at assets from the other areas. I know the wastewater system is particularly sensitive to, flooding type conditions, but we'll look at assets for all the different, components of GRU. Also wanted to do is thank Gail and Alice Rankler with Public Works for leading the city's effort with the vulnerability assessment, and of course, extend appreciation to Alachua County for doing such a robust analysis. I think this really provides a great opportunity for us all to step back and take a comprehensive look at, where we're at and, what our, concerns are going to be and be able to address those together. So we really appreciate that. I was going to note too, with the Resilient Florida grant funding, I know we were fortunate to actually get $4.8 million this year for our improvements to our wastewater system. So we're really happy about that. And I'm very hopeful that doing our vulnerability assessment and adaptation plans that Gail talked about, that there'll be the ability for the city and Alachua County to hopefully get more funding in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Hutton. We do have a couple.
Thank you.
We do have a couple of questions up here. First, it's Commissioner Alford.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'm sorry, can I get your name again?
Sure. Gail Morey.
Gail Morey. Yeah, my first thoughts were about city-county interaction, right? So the county might, or either one, the city or the county might take a mitigation effort that would have a negative effect on the other side or something like that. So I'm happy to hear that the county is doing a similar analysis, I'm hoping.
Yeah, the floodwise communities vulnerability assessment, you've already turned yours in.
We're actually a little bit farther behind the city in our floodwise effort. We have a draft of our report and our matrix. It looks basically the same, with everything is clustered into that upper right-hand corner. So we'll be refining that and returning that to floodwise probably in the next month or so. We're moving forward. We'll be doing a similar analysis with critical infrastructure as part of the Jones Edmonds effort. And with the inundation models that are being developed in that effort. So it'll be similar to what the city's done with the First Street data. The definitions of critical infrastructure, like Gail mentioned, basically I think it's about every month city and county staff have a meeting together to work out what that critical infrastructure is. So the work that Catherine's done has been incredible and will be the basis of also as we expand that out to the entire county and to the smaller municipalities. It'll be the same definition, same methods. Where the inundation model, I think we may see that there might be some differences because we'll have control over the scenarios, which change factor we use. So there might be some differences in floodplains at different points in time.
Okay, thank you. And a couple more questions. Is safety one of the factors that you look at? So for instance, if we have large open ditches that are moving water around, they become raging torrents after some large rain events, which is a safety factor in certain neighborhoods, right? Because they're not fenced. Or other things like that. I mean, there's a risk of flood, but there's also a safety impact. Is that something that's considered at all?
Ultimately, as we move forward through the adaptation process and picking projects, ranking projects, yes, we'll be looking at a variety of scoring components. And I didn't mention, but one of our scoring components ultimately will be added points for whether or not it's in a track at risk. We'll be looking at socioeconomic criteria as well. But yes, safety is definitely a scoring component when we start looking at what projects do we move forward.
And I assume when you were looking at the airport, you looked at like the landing strips as well as roads around the airport. It looked like that whole area was kind of grayed out, so I wasn't sure.
The project that I was specifically referring to is actually a failure that we had during Elsa. So that road is actually closed right now.
But the airport itself
The airport is part of-
considered a critical infrastructure, and so
absolutely.
that's part of the analysis. Okay,
Yes.
because it's such a huge area. And then my last question is for actually you and Justin. I am attending a legislative event with the American Flood Coalition in June, and with staff's approval, would Jill mind being contacted so that I can like understand a few things better, so that I can, when I'm talking to legislatures, I can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Did you have a follow-up question to something that she asked? You look like you were trying to hop in.
Yeah.
Okay, do you mind if she goes first, Commissioner Wheeler?
Not at all.
Okay,
Enjoy.
please do. Commissioner Hutchinson, you're okay, just turn you on.
She's new.
There you go.
So she's a little nervous. So we're really good.
She's not new.
Yes,
Yes,
I
she
am
is
very
new
new.
as
Good morning to everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just absorbing it. There's so much information here today, but I'm so thankful and glad to be here. And there's been a lot of great information I've heard so far. My question is this mapping tool, is this restricted only for Gainesville, or is it a county thing that you got the mapping part of it, or
The
that's what I
mapping
was trying
tool
to
in general
understand.
could be shared. The stuff in general, it's the GRE. There's certain pieces of information. We got some information from emergency management. They asked for us not to share publicly, and then GRU's data is also protected. All of that's there's like certain critical facilities that are protected under Chapter 119 Florida statute. So it's just a matter of maybe going through a process and maybe getting permissions. But that overall, just the simplistic mapping tool, I think we could give a prototype, not with necessarily all the data, but the overall prototype. It's ArcGIS based.
And
What would the county be doing?
I was gonna say, maybe one of our staff could address how we're working with the smaller municipalities to incorporate them into our vulnerability analysis.
That's what, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm.
Thank you, Shane.
That's a really great question. All of the municipalities are included in our vulnerability analysis. So Hawthorne and all the smaller cities will be included. Where we are at a point now starting the quantitative, the second task. So this is where the city is right now with their vulnerability work. Where you expect that we might approach city staff to look for certain pieces of critical infrastructure that you know where they are, that we might not. So there could be, I think there could be a data request coming up. As far as the presentation of results, I think, Justin, we haven't decided, we haven't finalized how in the long term the results will be available, but it should be a similar, similar type of web-based system.
Thank you.
Right,
And I guess I would just request that as we get closer to the final report and we have that data, that we ask, that we get it on our joint meeting agendas with the smaller municipalities so that they can better understand what resources are out there for them.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Wheeler.
A quick question, is FDOT involved in any
any of this when it comes to the roads in terms of flooding? Because I know in the past, when we've talked to them in the county about flooding, often they didn't realize the roads were flooded.
Yeah, we have not worked with them directly in this specific process, but I will mention that DOT is working on looking at rainfall distribution across the state for their purposes. They use what we call IDF curves to predict rainfall distribution in various parts of the state, and they are looking at that now, but it's a couple years out, is what we've been told.
Okay, and I'm not familiar with the term critical asset. What is an example of a critical asset that you have marked out through the city?
Critical assets could be shelters, bridges, affordable housing. So we do have affordable housing that is impacted. City infrastructure, parks. There's actually some parks
Okay.
on the list.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you, that helps me, because
Sure.
I did not have reference to that at all. Thank you.
Commissioner Poe, Mayor Poe. Apologies.
I answered just about anything, but thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thanks for the work. This is really helpful to me, kind of getting down to that kind of granular detail. And what I'm kind of projecting forward based on Commissioner Wheeler's point is that once we have identified all these highly vulnerable areas, then it will be our responsibility to sort of contact and work with a mitigation plan for whoever the responsible party is. So if it's a part of the state highway system, we'll need to let them know, that this vulnerability exists in this area of their responsibility. If it's a city road, we'll take ownership of that. Same with, there's state FDOT stormwater basins, there's, so we're gonna, it seems like this stage is let's just identify where the vulnerabilities are, and then once we're able to do that with a high degree of certainty, then it's up to developing a sort of integrated mitigation plan to start addressing those, including where does the money come from, how do we coordinate activities. I think the point came up earlier from Commissioner Alfred that, there could be areas that are impacted that involve both city and county facilities or assets, and so we don't want the county going in and doing a bunch of work and then the city following up 2 years later, and there's an economy of scale there as well. So that's going to be a heavy lift, trying to sort of figure all that out and prioritize it and make sure it's well coordinated, including sometimes where that coordination is difficult, because of so many different, responsible parties. But, can you give, you might have said it and I missed it, I apologize if I did. Can you give us a timeline, and including with the county, sort of when you're caught up to where we're all gonna be in the same place, and we can get to that next step of developing a sort of action plan to address this?
In terms of our vulnerability assessment and completing our overall final report, we're looking at trying to have that done here in the next month.
Okay.
So we'll submit our portion, the one portion that goes up to floodwise, but then we have the whole other expanded effort. And that we're probably just a couple weeks away, but I'm going to say about a month for all of us to really have time to go through it, make sure we're happy with all the data, and what we're presenting, and whether or not we need to add anything, take anything out if it's irrelevant, et cetera. As far as the county,
As far as the county's timeline on our vulnerability analysis, I think the quantitative critical infrastructure part of that, we're looking at probably early fall of this year. Justin, I'm not getting too far ahead of myself. That's early fall. And then task 3, which has some of the, I would say that it doesn't relate to critical infrastructure, but some of the community-based impacts, probably I would say on our schedule, it's going to be late winter of next year, so early 2023. Okay.
So, Madam Chair and all my colleagues on the committee, that is kind of a root of one of my concerns, is we're going to see significant turnover on the city commission. And as you all know, when you first come into elected office, it is overwhelming. All of the things that come at you, and they're all critical, right? When you first start, like there's no like sort of easy lift, and it's all overwhelming. And so, what I would like to ask of our staff, and maybe Madam Clerk, if you can help me remember to take this up with our charter officers when I speak with them, is we're going to need some sort of focused attention to bring all of our new elected officials up to speed, because they're going to be asked to make some really critical, expensive, and impactful decisions without having gone through all this process that we've had the benefit of. And so of the plethora of other things that they're going to be asked to do when they come on board in January, this cannot slow down, right? They've got to come, and they're going to be asked like pretty quickly when they come on board, to start making some long-term impactful decisions. And so I just want to be prepared for that and get something kind of ready for them to get caught up to speed and whatever, answer any questions if they have concerns or, aren't quite convinced of certain outcomes that, all the active members of the board are already comfortable with, that we, allow them the opportunity to work through those. So so this doesn't get sort of slowed down unnecessarily. Because there's nothing that hasn't been presented today that shouldn't just absolutely concern everybody involved, and the work's got to continue in a really, purposeful pace. So that's all. If we can, I'll do whatever I can to sort of make that a soft handoff, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah. One comment on that, if I can. I guess I would say that I feel like it'll be right around sort of that transition time that we would be having our final data. And I do think that the climate action planning part of this sort of, what are we going to do to mitigate? What are we going to do to adapt? What projects are we going to address up front that are the most vulnerable, that are the most at risk, is going to take more than like a 1 hour meeting sitting here. And so I think that maybe we could ask our staff, as we're approaching that time frame, to think about a workshop or a special retreat where we could once again just kind of give that overview, ask that all commissioners come prepared, that they've all read these analysis and these reports that our staff and our consultants have spent so much time on, and come prepared, but to have a time in that workshop or retreat session where we really just ask the questions of the reports, not so much get a bunch of presentations again, but really dig into the data, make sure we understand it, and then transition into more of a dialogue about next steps. And that would give those commissioners some time to read those reports, ask questions of their own team internally, and then bring it forward and really make sure that we're all on the same page. Because I think there will be questions that you all will have, and the new commissioners will have, that will probably also bring forward good information for all of us. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Madam Chair. For me, it's all about the orientation and onboarding process.
Yeah.
We'll have probably some commissioners that are elected in August, so we'll have plenty of time to catch up. Others will be elected probably in early November, so still a couple months, which is enough. But I also know they're going to have a million other things coming at them, and this is going to be one small piece of it.
Yeah.
But it's going to be the piece where shortly after they take office, they're going to be asked to make some very consequential decisions. So it's just, that's more for our staff to as we figure out that onboarding process.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Making sure that this is a focus. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Wheeler.
Just a quick question about the actual power of the vulnerability assessments. How can we use these? I know going for our own information and moving forward, but my concern is we get further and further out of the urban boundary where the developments are coming in, particularly in the east part of the county where there's a lot of water. I don't know if we can use this in any way. The two of you can tell me, because we do have county properties right in the middle of Gainesville. I have one, off 48th Terrace. I'm in the county on a dirt road in the middle of Millhopper. But I'm just concerned about the growth that we're seeing pushed to the fringes, and if we can use this in any way, you know, to resist some of the places that folks are trying to build.
I think that's what we'll be doing when we do our climate action planning, is beginning to look at where we have vulnerabilities in our code and our.
But what strengths do we have going against state and private property rights and all of that in terms of how we can actually protect potential buyers? You know, this is my concern, that we have developers who are going out into these areas, building up in places where they shouldn't be, redirecting creeks and rivers where they shouldn't be, and then these suspecting buyers, maybe for the first time and maybe the only thing they ever invest in, you know, are buying into something that we know is going to flood. I just didn't know if there's any power in this. This is what I'm asking.
Well, I know from, at least from our vulnerability assessment perspective, one of the things that we talk about as far as adaptation and adaptability of those components is how do our current stormwater regulations deal with projected weather and climate change, and can we make changes to those that will assist in that process? So that could be that they have to design larger retention ponds or underground facilities, so to speak. It could be that they have to make certain improvements in the infrastructure in the roadway. Now, that's been somewhat of a pushback from the development community to a certain degree, but we have had some limited success in getting some infrastructure placed associated with a new development. But those are things that we do have to think about, is do our stormwater regulations need to change fundamentally to address this? And this is also something that at the statewide level, we're hearing lots of change on the statewide level of what does the state need to do through the environmental resource permitting process to make adjustments to this. And then of course DOT, you asked about DOT, and they're already looking at what modifications they might need to make to their rainfall distributions that they use to design by. So a very good question.
Well, and if I might, I mean, I do think that that's a place where we come in, right? Because we can take a look at all of our policies, our comprehensive plan, our codes, our regulations, our mitigation fees, and we can sort of analyze, do we have all of the protections built in? Do we have all of the expectations built into all those codes, all those plans, in order to communicate with the development community what our expectations are to protect our community in terms of building and growth? And we can also publish maps that provide information to the general public as they're looking to purchase property that show, you know, flood vulnerability, and that's going to impact their ability to get insurance, their ability to get mortgages. And so I think that will also drive some conversations, both, you know, throughout the development community and the real estate community, as well as with us on the policy end. So I think we've got a ways to go, but I think a lot of that'll be on our plates to have to decide to commit to Mayor Poe's point.
One, I would just add specifically on the topic of floodplains or flood-prone areas, the inundation modeling that we do across the entire county will, and of course we don't know what that's going to look like right now, as we haven't selected the change factor, so we don't have the final scenario. But to the extent that there are areas that currently don't flood on property that would be at risk in the future, we will be able to identify that to a pretty good degree. It might not rise to what FEMA might want on a future flood insurance map, but part of the climate action plan process could be also to identify areas in the county where we need to do more detailed hydrologic and hydraulic analyses, and also how do we make use of the data that we do have in terms of making decisions as far as stormwater regulations like Gail brought up, or general growth, land development regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I just finish up, Brett? And the reverse of that in times of drought, which we have seen, is saltwater intrusion. Then where we've got farmers who are irrigating with brackish water, or and that's happened too. That's happened. So I don't know if that enters into, I mean, the opposite, of flooding, when you're tapping into groundwater that's been infiltrated with salt.
Justin, we are going to look at some groundwater level work in test 3, I believe, right?
For the farmland, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then just also want to mention, Steve also came up to me and as part of the climate action plan process, there are plans for a climate summit. So, a bigger meeting than we're having now.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, we're on to commission comment. Are there any?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Real quick, I had a excellent meeting with a representative from a company who has a software product that helps municipalities or local governments track their climate policy and climate resilient goals. It very much overlaps with the last conversation we had with the Citizen Advisory Committee and their sort of frustrations and also projected needs. It's the only open source product in the world that does this, and it's relatively low cost. So I had a meeting with Chair Wheeler and senior staff to sort of talk about it. They're going to meet with the individual and see if they think that it's a fit. And if they don't see any red flags, what I'd like to do is invite them to present to us at our next meeting sort of what this is and how it might help us better sort of, not just us, but it's publicly accessible. So sort of in real time, it'll allow everybody to track sort of progress on the many goals that we have towards sustainability goals, climate resiliency goals, all that. So I just want to let you know that I had that meeting, and then hopefully if we have room on our next agenda, we can sort of get a presentation and see if it fits our needs.
Sounds good. I would be excited about that. I would hope that part of the staff analysis on that would be that it dovetails with some of the other pieces that we've got. Because I feel like the city has done such a good job about building public-facing tools like My GNV and all of those, and we're working on a number of different mapping tools and things that'll go out. So just, I guess, in part of that conversation, I hope they'll look at how that dovetails with all of those, so we're not giving our community yet one more.
It's not proprietary. It's not. It just you can. It's the data that you have and then how it's presented outward facing.
I just like to mention, I'm Megan Steve Hofstadter with Environmental Protection. We are meeting with them May 10th internally to have a presentation to staff.
Okay. Great. So after that, we'll get it on an agenda.
Sounds good.
All right. Do you have any commission comment? No.
Very quickly, I just want to bring attention to something that I learned about yesterday. The Kemers Trail Ridge South Mine. Kemers has a permit to mine 886 acres of Swanee River water management land in eastern Bradford County. The mine will be located along the Bradford-Clay County line north of the Keystone Airport. The reason it's going on the Swanee River water management land, even though that's protected land, is that they never bought the mineral rights on it. And so that is connected. It's south of what the current Kemers Trail South mine is now. The Kemers mine. The area is the headwaters for streams that flow into the Santa Fe Swamp. The proposed mine has potential impacts on Santa Fe Lake, Little Lake Santa Fe, and the upper Santa Fe River. Major concerns are potential impacts of altered water flows and discharges of iron above the limits set for surface water. Both concerns are regulated by a draft industrial wastewater permit noticed by DEP. Bradford Environmental Forum has 12 areas of concern associated with the draft industrial wastewater permit, and will be asking DEP to hold a public meeting to discuss the proposed industrial wastewater permit for the Trail Ridge South facility, which is the one that they're actually trying to start. DEP has determined that Kemers has provided reasonable assurance that the facility complies with Florida statutes and Florida Administrative Code. I would urge us to all try to get some more information about what's going on here. If you all know anything about it, it's a titanium mine.
Well, I guess I would ask that we, at least for the county commission, we have three of us here, but we'd have to ask when to get it to our staff to take and analyze, to look at, and then they could bring back.
But I just want everybody here to know that Stacy has it, and we'll be following up with those folks who've been reached out to the county for help, since we helped the Bradford Union with that mining.
Well, we're still in that. Yeah, we're still in it. So, all right, Commissioner Alford.
Three things. First, I wanted to share with the city folks that at our last county commission meeting, we recognized Bill Black and Denise Matthews as Land Stewards of the Year. It's a Sparkleberry Farm, very, very cool place. So if you know them, please give your congratulations. I also wanted to let the public know, if anyone's listening, about the Zero Waste Grant for $40,000. If you have a innovative waste reduction strategy, you could work with the county on that and get a little bit of money. And then finally, I wanted to ask the city. I want to applaud you guys for your work on restoring and opening up creek beds through the city. I think that's a good thing. And then I was curious if there was any efforts to do similar kind of work on some of those same old streams that were turned into ditches through parts of East Gainesville and Northwest Gainesville. Some of them are pretty, like the ones in East Gainesville dump straight into Noonan's Lake, which we're trying to clean up. So it's like it could be an opportunity to work together.
Yeah, I think there's ongoing conversations about different segments, especially with Sweetwater. So I don't know. We could get a kind of list of potential, efforts. But some of them are built into larger projects. I don't. We'd have to look at each segment and kind of.
I just didn't know where y'all were with. I knew where you were with some projects. I just didn't know where we were with all of them. So it'd be a greater conversation. I was just curious if that was.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's probably a project by project or case by case kind of. We look for the opportunities. So yeah, I don't know. We could probably get you a list of where we are with, at least in concept.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Okay. I have nothing today, so I am going to turn it over to the public. Do we have any public comment? Please introduce yourself.
Nancy Darren. There's way too much to comment on from today. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I want to express my thanks and gratitude to both city, county, and everyone for us being so fortunate to be in a place that really is doing so much so well and just support all these efforts. Really appreciate it. So a few things I'd encourage, if we talk about defossilization rather than decarbonization, since all greenhouse gases are very problematic, especially methane, which we're in code red. For natural gas, it's 114 times worse than CO2 in the 5-year period, which is about all we've got left. So discouraging natural gas and making sure we have policies that encourage electrification with heat pumps. The hot new thing are not gas stoves, they're induction stoves. Making sure their proper electrical outlets are putting in the electric capacity with any of these developments wherever they are. Triaging the shift to electrification with vehicles and transportation, that we really need to focus on our emergency management, our bus transit systems, our fleets. There's a global diesel crisis going on. 2 continents are incredibly short. If we go through with stuff next week with Russia, then Europe's going to be in a diesel crunch. They're rationing and there isn't any, and the price is very high, and we've seen that here. So just thinking about our farmers, our rural areas, our commuters, our public vehicles, I think that's something to really pay attention to and focus there if we can get grants like the electric buses or whatever. Then I want to thank Commissioner Ward and Alfred for focusing on all the good things. We've got the biomass plant, and that has kept us from using so much natural gas and coal. We've dropped coal from 75%, 76% to 17%. We've dropped CO2 emissions 47% here. But the whole thing with the forest management, and can we keep our standards and protect the quality and the renewableness of our biomass, while at the same time that we shift to be able to better utilize things that are now going to waste. In Irma, we were able to run the plant for almost 5 months on Irma debris, 17,000 tons of debris that were not doing what Hurricane Michael did to create huge wildfires. So
Thank you.
lots more.
Thank you, Ms. Darren. Anybody else from the public wish to speak? Okay, well, I think that this was a very productive meeting. I'm really grateful. I know while this was, just a couple hours of our time, it represents lots and lots and lots of staff hours and time and dedication. So thank you all so much for your hard work. And to our consultants, thank you so much. We're looking forward to final reports. And with that, meeting adjourned.